next keynote. And I want to warn everyone that this session will be recorded. If you do not want your face on this recording, turn off your camera, but we'd love to see your face on the recording, so please stay. I have the amazing pleasure of introducing Vita Kovanović, who will speak to us, give us this wonderful keynote. He is a senior lecturer at the University of South Australia, Education Futures. And he's a member of the Center for Change and Complexity in Learning. And just to let you know what kind of researcher Vita is, one of my most prominent memories with Vita is I was thinking from a qualitative background, I'm using 50 codes. I'm really getting it in that 50 codes is a lot. That'll cover everything. But I was having issues in deciding which of those 50 codes should go into a network. And I decided to write everyone on this community Slack that we have. So this is not the ICQE one, but a community Slack, which you should feel free to join if you haven't yet. And I wrote, guys, I'm having trouble with the 50 codes that I'm using. I know it's too much. And Vita wrote back and said, I have 130. I know exactly what you're going through. This and this and this is a good solution. So without further ado, Vita, please give us your wonderful keynote.
Thanks, Sylvie, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to the session. Let me just share my screen. You should be able to see slides, I hope. Yeah, so what I'll be talking today is really the role of quantitative ethnography within learning analytics. So give you a bit of an overview and some of the things that have been happening, what it's been used, and you know, what some of the things for the future directions for future research. And as Sylvie said, I'm from University of South Australia and work as a senior lecturer there. And I've been part of this community for a few years and being involved in use of quantitative ethnography, especially in learning analytics, which is my broader area of work. So what's learning analytics? So there's this wonderful graphic by Stan Hackley, but really it's a field that looks at using data, digital data collected about learning for understanding and improving learning. And on the side, you will see the definition. First of all, we have all of different 4 phases. So measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting, right? These 4 stages of basically any data analysis. What we are collecting is data about learners and contexts. And that's another important part. Data about, not just about students, but where they're learning. So the courses, materials, and so on. Why do we do all of these 2 things? Really to understand learning and to improve learning, to optimize. And we want to optimize and improve 2 things. How they learn, so learning processes, and also the places where it happens. For example, improve the environments, to improve the materials, to improve those kind of things. So those are really the things we are trying to do. And if you think about learning analytics, there are different types of learning analytics. For example, the most simplest form, and many institutions will have those available, is descriptive analytics. What happened? Basically describing this student logged in 5 times, for example, or this student didn't log in for, you know, last week didn't log into the system at all, didn't submit an assignment, didn't do this or that or whatever. But then also more important is why certain things happen. So diagnostic to see, okay, so certain things, you know, why certain things happened and what's the cause of it. Then, of course, there's the next one, which is very known, is predictive analytics. So trying to see what will happen in the future. So we might say, okay, a specific student didn't do some certain activity. You know, we predict that he will achieve this results, or he should do, for example, pick these courses as the next courses rather than these other ones, because we predict that this is a better pathway to take. But all of this is, you know, lower level than to the prescriptive analytics, but where we want to really see, okay, do something because we want something else to happen. For example, we know student didn't achieve, didn't complete certain learning activity. How about we then do this intervention because we want this thing to happen? So that's the idea, that we have analytics about interventions themselves. So really be more proactive in our approach. And the field itself is highly interdisciplinary. So there is this Venn diagram from one of the papers a few years ago that I wrote with my colleagues. There's a bunch of different fields contributing. So that's why we decided to have only theory, design, and data science, because there are different, within these three circles, there are many, many different fields. First of all, computer science, obviously, because we're dealing with digital technologies. But there's data science, there's machine learning, there's statistics, natural language processing, human-computer interactions, highly influential as well. Then those are all, you would say, technical fields. But then there is, of course, educational psychology, educational sociology, and their angle on how humans learn with technologies and learn within groups. There is, of course, educational theory, pedagogy, instructional design, and so on. So field is highly interdisciplinary. And as I mentioned, there are different kinds of uses of analytics. What we can do is all of those different different levels and for different purposes. For example, predicting student success, supporting students, doing recommendation of materials, different kinds of activities. And their field has many promises, of course, but there's many challenges. And some of the most important ones are around, ethical use of data, about, adoption of technologies and when they will be used, literacy, data literacy, both from students and all the other stakeholders, validity of measures that we're collecting, and of course the policies, how we're going to connect and guide the use of analytics. And there was a very recent, this is not really, this image is from UK, where there was a few, last year was a big backlash about use of algorithms rather than entrance exams to university. So the problem with the coronavirus, the government decided to actually do the prediction from the previous students' success and all of their high school achievements to predict how they will achieve on a test, because they didn't want students to take the test because of pandemic. And the modeling itself was pretty good. I mean, this is the best modeling you achieve. Those are not bad statisticians. Those are the best statistician UK can find. So that's not a problem. But the reality is this misuse of the previous data and how the system is perceived. Do students perceive that this to be a fair way of doing things? It was quite amazing to see slogans like this: "Your algorithm doesn't know me." I've never seen ever a protest against computers. Really, this is like a sci-fi thing, that you're protesting against machines. And even some other ones that were quite interesting, and we know this from analytics as well, like "judge my work, not my postcode," which was quite interesting, because we know what they are really referring to if you're doing learning analytics is feature engineering. That and the further analysis revealed that postcode and the school that you're going in had a big influence in the way the algorithm is working, and is really quite remarkable to see something like that. Of course, not everybody was so polite, and there were some other additional slogans, but quite interesting. I really find it, this is not learning analytics, but some kind of the attitude towards, something similar can happen as well. Of course, there is another problem that comes from the different viewpoints on education itself. So what we are doing, is that valid at all? Fine, students are doing certain things, or there's certain data being collected. Is it really what we should be focusing on? And there are people saying, well, this is not the point of measuring everything. Like this idea of that we shouldn't be measuring things. And so those are some of the very important, almost philosophical views on analytics. And what I want to talk to you about today is how some of these issues and how we can bridge using QE to bridge some of those different viewpoints and develop learning analytics, given that it's so interdisciplinary, and quantitative ethnography can be quite useful for bridging these gaps. And so I'm going to cover a bit how is QE used in learning analytics research, and what kind of data is being analyzed, so that over years there have been different kinds of data being used, what methods to analyze, and look some of the as I see good pathways for future development. So my journey with QE started reading some of the really influential papers early in my PhD. And I started playing with ENA, which was the epistemic network analysis, that by far most popular technique in QE community, and really used it first for modeling some of the interview data. So the idea was, okay, yeah, seems like a very promising technique, but what was very interesting to me is how it's not a mixed method, but in a sense, I call it personally blended method. In a and it blends two different. I always had a problem with mixed methods, which is basically not really mixing. It's sequentially doing two things. I'm doing quantitative and then following up with the qualitative afterward, completely independently almost. Whereas this is a different thing. It's somehow in a very strange way. To me, at first, it was very unique thing, and yeah. So. I'll just give a brief overview of things. So this was actually the keynote by Dragan Gašević 2 years ago at the first ICQE conference, when he was talking about the role of QE in learning analytics, and in one specific area. Specifically, this would be if you look at this bottom cycle of going, how the analysis steps are going. So coming from theory, designing, collecting the data, preparing, and modeling. And there, in the modeling and theory phases, where QE methodology would be, QE-informed process of analytics, where we will be collecting the data and doing, adjustment of our modeling approach using quantitative ethnography. However, that's fine, but there's some of the key reasons where it's really achieving a lot of success is this the definition of these thick descriptions, not just bridging between the quantitative and qualitative description, the real why certain things are happening and how they're happening, rather than, okay, we found the difference between certain groups or we found certain significant effect. These thick descriptions is where this QE is quite powerful, because it can provide the bridging of bridging between theory and data. So if we look at this cycle from one of the papers a few years ago, the idea of this cycle, right? That's the same cycle that we saw in the previous slide. We start with the theory, and then go in the circle to provide the data, and then QE really allow us to call this, to close this loop. And there were some very nice memes in the Slack channel about this, closing the loop between the data and theory. So going back to the raw data and seeing, okay, we can really see why certain things are being, the way they are, and so we can go to this original description of the data and analyze and see, okay, so this is where we are seeing this, from interpretation to data. We can that's the place where we can close the loop. And so in terms of, those would be the big benefits, right? Benefits of using QE. So defining these thick descriptions, being able to provide, close the loop between the theory and data. And that's quite important, especially in a field like learning analytics, where there is, you might say, one sub-part of the community which is very theory driven, and the other one we might be more data driven and, coming from data science view of things. That's where it's very, very important that we are able to connect these two things together and provide, a good description of what's actually happening. So first thing that we looked at, and this is one recent paper that I've just used examples from my own research and from others as well. There's different insights into learning processes. This is a big thing that QE has been used. And for example, been used heavily to analyze self-regulation. There have been many papers about that, metacognition, critical thinking. And the benefit of this is it's very intuitive visual representation. So this would be an example of using epistemic network analysis. It provides very, very useful insight into how the different important constructs in the problem domain are related. So in this case, we can see these two different red and blue are two different groups of students. So students from natural sciences and students from humanities, and how they are in terms of their metacognition, differences in their metacognition. So we can see, for example, that and very clearly that students in natural sciences, they're focusing more, MK stands for metacognitive knowledge. So they're focusing more on metacognitive knowledge, actions and goals, whereas the students in humanities are going more about discussing a metacognitive experience, that's ME, and the context. So really we easily see the differences between these groups. And that's something, this kind of visualizations help really bridge between the different communities. So researchers will be mostly focusing on qualitative analysis and researchers focusing more on quantitative analysis. They've been similar, that's been already discussed heavily in another keynote last year by Salman Buckingham, which was also, take a look if you haven't seen that, really, how we can use these kind of visualizations to provide, almost, help us think about the domain. And there's another one from also my research in metacognition. And interesting thing about this one was that it's, aside from using the, this one was really using the log trace log data. So that's something very unique and specific to learning analytics. We use a lot of trace data and analyze that. And this was the place, one of the studies that utilized trace data and examine learning processes using QE from trace data. So I would just show you two different plots. So there is one group of students, and this is their visualization of their self-regulated activities. So, and there's this other group. And you can see that there have been, there's quite a strong difference, especially in use of formative tasks and knowledge building activities. So we see this is actually the top quartile group, and this is the bottom quartile group of students. So, based on their success, and then we can easily see the difference. Okay, what is that the high achieving students are doing that the low performing students aren't? And so the interesting thing here was that trace data, the original raw trace data, has been converted and categorized into different phases of self-regulation that been, the approach they use there. And then after that's been done, that's really the codes and constructs that we care about. The trace data very well captured that, and then it was quite a good fit for this kind of methodology. Now, another thing that's being used heavily is analyzing social side of learning. So analyzing student interactions and the way students learn in groups. So there is quite actually several papers famously talking about chat conversations and dialogues from virtual internship, and that data has been used quite heavily. But also another one was forum discussions. So forum discussions have been heavily analyzed as well. And for example, there was a recent paper as well that looked at the data from 13-week grad course. And there was also, the interesting thing about this one was also include both face-to-face and online activities. And the course was based on this humanistic approaches to building a student community, and students had different discussions. And what's interesting here was looking at how the groups are developing. So there are 4 stages of the group development. So again, heavily theory driven, that groups go through different stages of their development, and how they're what's characteristic for the different stage. So if you look at over time, I think this is very, very useful to see. So in initial stage, focus on empathy and why certain desire to participation. So that's been heavily discussed within learning community. Then in the next stage, when the groups is transitioning and establishing itself, focus on sharing personal and private feelings. And then eventually in the higher levels, when the group becomes reaches this stage, working stage, it's still about dynamics, but empathy becomes central in the course, in the discourse. And another example was from analysis of student discussion posts. So analysis of also grad level course, but this was a fully online course based on community of inquiry pedagogy, and it focused on how the students develop their social presence and how it relates to different topics that have been discussed. So analysis here was analysis, unit of analysis was a single message, and it was a quasi-experimental also evaluation of the different instructional approaches. So originally students were given one set of instructions, how they should be participating, and then few of course offerings later, they've been given different set of instructions. Interesting thing here was another interesting approach, I would say almost specific to learning analytics, is use of topic modeling. So in this case, codes were theory driven, such as these codes of around the community of inquiry pedagogy, but also there have been codes assigned for use of different topics. So first we ran topic modeling, and topic modeling produced certain set of topics that students are discussing, and then those topics are being used as codes for the follow-up analysis. So what we can see here is, and we had these 2 groups, right, how they were given different instructions, and then we can see, for example, the control group was the first group. We see that the topics aren't discussed equally and the difference, these 3 presences, affective, the different stages of social presence, affective, cohesive, and interactive, and they're differently spread out. Whereas if you look at the treatment group, it's far more uniform. We see far more uniform distribution, and the benefit of that was because students were given more detailed instructions, and the topics all they're discussing about is software engineering and the different stages of software engineering cycles. So by doing this intervention, we were able to see, okay, yes, this really helps promote discussion of different topics rather than students focusing on only a few things that they had found interesting. Another important domain was analysis of content and curriculum, and specifically analysis of student writings, whether it's essays or say reflective journals or analysis of curricular data. So, different, you can say written products and written artifacts. And so to illustrate, one of them was the look of different lesson plan analysis. So idea of the research was, okay, so we have STEM fields, but there are different, there is science, there is technology, there is mathematics, and so on. Are they having different epistemological views of knowledge? Do they use different kinds of knowledge when they're teaching these domains? And can we, for example, there's been recent push to merge all of these different topics into one, to teach STEM, as one subject. But will that be a clash between different approaches for teaching? Is it fundamentally different the way we are teaching mathematics to the way we are teaching, say, physics or computer science, and so on? So can that be, is it worthwhile to integrate these different fields? And for example, if you look at this, is by one of the papers a few years ago, Michael Phelps was the lead, looking at the difference, for example, between mathematics, physics, and IT. So the different kinds of knowledge and different, what's the focus on within all of these different domains is quite different. So we see that the mathematics focuses mostly on instruction evaluation, whereas the physics has a slightly different approach, and while IT has a quite significantly different, set of codes being seen. So, and then this kind of research will show us, okay, does it make sense to do some of those interventions? And this is something that will be debated in a very qualitative terms, or very, totally, without the ability to really see how, what's the real difference among these fields. Another one was interesting, was the look at this idea of single case learning analytics. And this is something very, very, reminds me of very qualitative research, when you really go, deep dive into one specific instance and then analyze, all of the different data that you have about, for example, one specific student. And this was interesting analysis of the diaries. So this was analysis of student reflective diaries. And, you have two colors in this plot, and this is, the pink would be, the days with low satisfaction, whereas the high satisfaction was in the days with the blue. Blue represent the days with the good overall satisfaction. And then we can see, for example, that there is a quite difference in terms of what codes are being mentioned. So for example, we can really see around red, there is setback, physical exhaustion, and long hours, and so on. So those kind of things being mentioned in the diary entries about the unproductive days, whereas the different kinds of things would be mentioned, social non-work and social work and so on, all of the different codes for, days that we over, high satisfaction. And then this kind of really provides a good insight into, what's really happening there. And I think much more powerful than, for example, use of a typical, bar plots and counting the instances of certain things, for example. And the fourth strand of use of QE in learning analytics been look at adoption as well. So learning analytics is one thing is to develop learning analytics. That's hard in itself, but it's a completely different story to be able to implement in a institution, say in university or a school, because there are different things in play there. It's not just about the good software tool and good analytic, but it's also because this is a socio-technical system, the way it integrates with the rest of the environment, with the different activities and so on. So years ago, we looked at the different adoption of of learning analytics across European universities, and this is this would be the ENA. I think this was probably Sylvie, the one I was talking to you about, having a lot of codes. Looking at how the learning analytics readiness and implementation codes are related to one another. So then we split the data into we have the codes for readiness and codes for current learning analytics implementation, and that's why you have these two different colors. So readiness are purple nodes, whereas the implementation are green nodes. And then we were able to see, okay, how the things are related between these two groups, which ones are the most important one. So this would be the overall analysis. And then we looked at more deeply into specifics. So for example, we see that the highest, the strongest link was between goals and approach. And then we looked at deep dived into, okay, when we talk about goals and approach, what specifically is there being discussed. So that way through two-level analysis of the high-level analysis, and then diving deep into subcodes, we looked at how the different things are, what is the stage of adoption really. So for example, this was evaluation of and how the different institutions in terms of their experience are different. So the blue ones would be inexperienced, whereas the yellow one were experienced. And then you'll see that different, what's the difference between these two groups of institutions. So we see that institution, as they're getting more experience, they'll be pushing to institutional adoption and focusing more on the teaching rather than just measuring learning. And then this is something similar. We looked at, this is still in the process under review, looking at K-12 domain. So difference between, we had the interviews with teachers and school leaders, and we collected different codes about how much they use different educational technologies, what's the culture, the purpose, the scope of analytics, goals, and all kinds of different things, what kind of challenges they see, and so on. And then we looked, I wanted to really, because this was a pilot before much had been done, is to see how they differ in terms of what they perceive as challenges, how they're viewing the use of analytics. And then we can really see that the school leadership is talking about a lot about the adoption, context, and purpose, which is similar to the teachers as well. However, teachers are also more discussing human resources and actually discussing the way they will be supported for use of analytics, because it's one thing they are they're realizing that there will be big challenges in actually their support, whether how they will be using analytics, and that's why that it's very clear from was clear from this analysis. Now, so those are all the different strands, like analyzing processes, analyzing the different products of learning, social aspects, and analyzing the adoption. That's fine, and those are some of the things we've been doing over years. And I've been, preparing for this keynote, I was really thinking about what would be what else can we do here, right? So this is all fine and quite useful, but there's still many things that we have to do. And first of all, so there's, at the moment, in learning analytics, the focus on QE has been ENA, but there are other things as well. So for example, the use of encoder and the different metrics there for supporting better development of, automating coding processes. So that's something that's existing, but also some new methods that have been actually developing at this conference and in this community. And so one interesting thing that's been, I think, for the future would be to use of the richer data sources. So first of all, use of different wearables and spatial data and LMS log traces. So this was one study that's been quite interesting to me. I've never thought that you can, wouldn't think of using QE in this domain, but really this was a study of students and their classroom activities. And what's being coded is position, literally spatial position of student within the classroom, which I think is actually totally makes sense. But you really innovative use of this methodology. So we can see, for example, two different teams and how they're, where they're positioned around the patient. So are they the foot of the bed or the, they're receiving help? Where where are they physically located? And that gives us, it's a really unique way of looking at this kind of data, this, richer data sources. And also at the same time, combining different data sources. So that's another new way of using QE, is not only to look at, for example, just reflective writings or social interactions, so on, but actually rather to combine them together, to combine different data sources together, and then use all of these different data as input to the analysis. Another direction was extraction of the codes automatically. So this was this example of topic modeling. This is something that can be done, and in certain cases makes sense. So the focus on theory is still there. We want to use theory and use codes that are theoretically driven, but at certain points, and especially for building the theories, it actually makes sense to use techniques that would define the codes. So for example, we can use cluster analysis to look at student interactions, for example, with a certain platform, and define the states, different distinct states students are going through while interacting with the system, and then use those states as codes for the follow-up analysis. That way we are combining this data-driven approach, common in machine learning, with them, and use it as a, I would say like a bootstrap for theory development. So originally, we have this closing of the loop for revising the theories, right? We start with the theory, say community of inquiry or whatever, this is the model of how groups are developed. These 4 stages of the group development, and we start with the theory. We do the modeling, do all of these things, and then we see, oh, look, we revise and build up on the theory. Say, okay, we now see that what we say the group is in the working stage. This is what it's actually happening. Or when students are cohesively interactive, this is what's happening. So we are enriching existing theories. That's excellent, but we can also use these approaches for building up and bootstrapping the theory development, almost like using, because that's something where we have strong potential of all of this data. So not to just go without the theory, but also to what would be Google approach. We don't need theories. No, we want to have theories, but we want to have theories. I think there's an opportunity for using the data to identify and help us, build new theories with the data. So the idea would be to use these methods for automated code destructions to identify, important constructs and important, for example, elements in the learning process and so on. And then we will be able to identify relationship through, ethnographic approach. And now, and this is this bit that will be very, very interesting to see, that going from data to theory, really to use the data to build up theories. Another thing is, most of this, and that's something for good and bad. Most of use of quantitative ethnography has been exploratory. And to be honest, most of learning analytics is exploratory. So all those things fit very nicely. And as the field is growing and becoming more mature, we're really now trying to confirm certain models and test models developed in one domain and use them in another domain and so on. So would it be possible to have form of a confirmatory modeling? For example, imagine we develop a certain set of codes, or theoretically whatever, we apply the codes, we analyze a certain domain, and now we are saying, okay, this is fine. These are the relationships in one domain. Can we apply to another domain and test whether those relationships hold? How much data, something similar to difference between running a regression model on a new data, so running regression model on the original data and the regression model on the new data, versus you build, SEM model and then feed the new data to the SEM model to see how much the model is actually, is the model a good fit for the new data. So I think that's something in the future in general, probably for QE field, but would be very important for learning analytics. Another thing is links to measurement theories. So, and that's one area where learning analytics in itself has to progress, is improve the reliability and the validity of learning analytics measures. So in many ways, the critique you see in the start, over focusing on measuring. It's not a problem with measuring. People think we are measuring the wrong things. So we are measuring things that are not important for learning. And that's very, that's a big thing. We should be measuring, when we say measure learning, we should be measuring really learning, not something that's easy for us to measure, right? So the measures we are collecting it's fundamental to the whole enterprise. And the same thing comes with QE. Could we define a certain metrics for how much, these measures are good for our own domain? For example, that the measures can be coded correctly and so on, but is there a certain way for us to, define as a community set of metrics, set of codes that are meaningful measures of learning, and then that will be, enable us to advance the field. So are we collecting the measuring things that we're supposed to do? And there I'll stop, and then if any have any questions, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Vita. Very thought-provoking keynote. Thank you. Perhaps we'll stop sharing your screen. Yep. I can do that because I guess I'm a host. Thank you so much. So I guess we'll open the floor up to questions. And while people get started on thinking about what exactly they want to ask Vita, I myself would have a question, if that's okay. And I think I'll start, I actually have several questions, but I'll start with something that you mentioned right at the end that kind of caught my attention. So when you were thinking about validity, you mentioned that a community would have to define codes in a way, and we could use those as a means to measure validity in individual projects. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
So the idea there would be, for example, in psychological research, you have a certain set of instruments, certain set of measures, and then you can argue, is this a good instrument or isn't, right? In learning analytics, the problem is every domain, every course is unique, every LMS is different, all of these different things are so unique, and we are collecting things that we can collect. On top of that, going for the low-hanging fruit, and then you're getting measures. Psychometrician will say this is all great, but how do you know? Why do you care about student logins, or why would you care about the length of essay, or why is that important? We need to come up with, and over time, probably the things will clarify, and certain things will, be identified. Okay, when we want to measure learning and monitor learning, we should be focusing on these things, because the theory and experience show that these are the important ones. And then it will be much easier, rather than starting every time from scratch, because when you start, really you're starting from scratch, you can do whatever you want. And that's something that's not really allowing us to progress so much.
Yeah, I actually think that psychology also has this problem of, you're talking about like construct validity, right? And, yeah, and comparing things to each other, but many times psychology has identical construct labels, yes. So like optimism, but they're operationalized, yes, differently among projects. So what exactly are we talking about when we're looking at validity compared to
and grit and other domains? And is it big five, or is it this, or is it that? There are millions of phrasing of the same thing, and we are just that, much more much stronger.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right. I'll open it up. Anyone have a question to Vita? Please raise your electronic hand because that's when you pop into sight. You might not be in the, thank you, Yeyu.
Thanks, Suri, and also thanks, Vita, for your excellent presentation. So I think one thing that you mentioned in your presentation is about the coding process when we're trying to deal with the qualitative data or discourse data in any format. I'm wondering, how do you think about the pros and cons in terms of using machine learning algorithms like NLP algorithms to ultimately code in the context of learning analytics, and also how some certain like QE approach currently we have is what are the pros and cons for the QE methods, and how do you think about the combination of the machine learning perspective and the QE perspective in terms of better identifying the topics or the interest of concept in our qualitative data?
It depends really so I really believe that the benefit, really the big benefit, is to really be able to advance the theory. So that's an important element. So even if we are using machine learning, I think there should be a link to the theory. Whether it's okay, we don't know what's happening, we want to understand, for example, different ways students are writing, or we'll be using NLP to extra different code, but then we want to interpret those and to make sense of them in almost like a theory building way, right? So that's something that's quite useful. And the other could be, and for example, my PhD was really focusing on that, using machine learning to automate already existing theoretical models. So there is a specific model and it has its own set of codes, but the process is very hard to do. It's very manual, labor intensive, takes you ages to code. Can we use machine learning to automate that? And that's fair game. So then we're starting, okay, we have a theoretical model. I'm just trying to automate things. I'm not trying to dismantle the theory or anything like that. So that I think that's very, very powerful and useful. The problem though is, as in all education and psychology, every domain is so different, then almost becomes, how much can we translate models from one domain to another? And I think that's really a big problem.
Yep, thank you.
It looks like Rogers has his hand up too.
Yeah, sure. Vita, thank you so much for a great presentation. That was really interesting, and it was good to see your journey between analytics and then quantitative ethnography. So my question is more of a comment. Being at the intersection of two fields, learning analytics is 11 years now, right? 11 years, 12 years old. And then we have a baby, which is 3 years old. Not 3 years, but at least in terms of the conference. So we have 3 years. So looking at the two fields, maybe I've been part of the analytics community for some time. What do you see as some of the lessons or some of the things you may think, maybe if you have been looking at learning analytics as a field, how it has been growing, maybe some of the things you could say for a young field like QE, what kind of things does the community need to learn or to put into consideration to make sure it grows? Or some of the things that you could see, maybe what learning analytics has been struggling with over the time until when it is maturing. So what kind of things do you think can be borrowed from learning analytics into the young field of quantitative ethnography in terms of helping it to grow?
Thanks, George. That's a good question. I would say the big benefit of learning analytics to other related domains, for example, artificial intelligence education, educational data mining, learning at scale, and all of the different relating communities, I would say the learning analytics is a bit unique in the sense that it was really focusing on interdisciplinary nature. So by far, it was, if you want to call it, most qualitative of all, most integrating the domains, and mostly, I guess, building up on interdisciplinarity. I would say that's a very, very good thing that the community has done. So Simon Buckingham can talk about that more, probably. He's been involved from day one. But I guess that would be my view of, I haven't been from day one. So this is what I see as a difference, for example, to other communities, really better, crossing the bridges between qualitative, quantitative computer science and education. So those are really the different paradigms of research there. And I think learning analytics has been doing exceptionally well in that area. I think similar thing is happening in QE community. There are people doing educational research, that's fine, but there are all the different other domains where QE has been used in business, finance, and all of the different domains. I think this is the excellent things are, for example, this data challenges and different projects where we're bringing people from different perspectives to work on things together. I think that was quite excellent thing.
Looks like your answer inspired both Brendan and David, but yes, Rogers, go ahead.
No, I was just saying thank you for the
Sorry,
reflection.
they switched places. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
David's so nice.
Yeah, I'll go with Brendan. Yeah.
Well, it's nice too, because I think my question is a cousin to Rogers, where it's maybe a different facet of a similar one. And Vita just kind of started to talk about it at the end. I'd be kind of curious, given how you've seen kind of the relationship between QE and learning analytics, what else we could think about in terms of reaching out outside to other domains? Like what has, if QE has gotten well established in learning analytics, are there other, like how do we have a similar, like if we could see a similar uptake or engagement with other communities, as you just mentioned, I think that would be interesting. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about what has made that productive. Some of it I think is overlap of people and shared ideas, but that's something that I think I'm very interested in that you started to touch on at the end of your last answer.
Yeah, it really comes down, I guess, to the fields that learning analytics is a unique field in itself, because it's really bringing computer science and data science and then education, which is not traditionally. So, for example, I could think of domains such as computational social science, where really sociology is, has their own approaches, right? We developed over years, but then you come all of these new kids coming with their data analysis and doing all of the different computational modeling. There, I also see a bit of the paradigm, difference, where I think QE could be almost like a bridge between them. I think this is what it achieves in learning analytics. When I show somebody QE visualization, even if their background is educational sociology, they can see that and understand and appreciate that. If we show them the SVM and the classification algorithm, they couldn't care less about that. So, yeah.
All right, David, I think you're next.
Yeah, so I guess I want to ask the question maybe in the opposite way, in a sense, right? I mean, all tools come with ideologies embedded in them, right? In the learning analytics, there's a set of tools that made possible some of the kinds of questions and focuses us on looking at certain kinds of data. In Q, and I guess what I'm trying to ask is, beyond just the utility of ENA itself, are there, ENA also embodies a particular set of ideological principles, ways of dealing with data, ways of thinking about validity, ways of thinking about discourse itself, ways of thinking about meaning, and so on. Do you see opportunities for whether or not it has happened? Are there opportunities for the kind of perspective that people at this, at this gathering have to rub off on the ways in which people within learning analytics use other tools other than just, ENA or encoder or any of the, or ROC or the tools that currently exist? First, is that a well-formed question? And before we go any further,
to be honest, don't know personally, because I guess the benefit here was it's allowing us to bridge between the different perspectives. I would say allow us to bridge between very positivist generalizability view of science and this data generalizability focus and so on, the quantitative approach versus the qualitative view of, let's say, each student is unique, they have their learning experience unique, and but the model allow us to bridge between them. Yes, there are certain, of course, the validity and what we the connections are meaning, the meaning of the codes are important, that their relationship means something and so on. So there are these embedded things. They weren't, I guess, they weren't ever a problem for both sides. So that's why we were able to agree on them. Is there something else? Don't know, to be honest. I'm thinking, I always was thinking, what else could we do similarly? Okay, so this is about, basically understanding the domain, like what is the relationship between the key construct? What else can we do in a similar way to build like to almost like a replicate the approach? And I couldn't think of personally I would really interested in that, where else we can do similar kind of build up on the connecting different communities in the project.
Yeah, well, I mean, so I'm thinking out loud a little bit here, but like the concept that you referred to of kind of closing the interpretive loop, right? That is, of being able to take the model results and ground them back in the original data. Is that something that we can or should be applying to to other techniques, like for example SPM, right? So SPM, one of the big bugaboos of SPM is that you run it and you get 3,000 sequences, and then you chop off the top, whatever 10 or 10%, and then you look at them and you kind of squint your eyes and you go, these have a lot to do with this and this, right? Is there some way of tying the model more closely to the data and the sense making in a case like that, or does it provoke that question? Does it ask us to say, wait a minute, we're doing what with that method? Those sorts of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's what I was thinking about, building up the theory, right? We will be using the data analytics, for example, SPM, whatever, you run it to, okay, yeah, that will allow us to come up with a theoretical, model, and then we will be using, and because eventually that's what just crunching the numbers without knowing what they're doing, it's fine for building the tool, but not to understand. So you can build a fantastic predictive model, not knowing how it works, and who cares how it works? And often you will see that, why do you care about which predictors are being used? That's fine. Actually, that's not a bad viewpoint if you're just focusing on what the model does. If you want to move to this, okay, I know why its model is doing this, and because I want to achieve this outcome, I want this I will do this intervention because that will let me block, and so on. For that, I really need to know what's happening. And that's where we are seeing the fully data-driven approach failing. You can develop deep learning that works fantastically. Try to make that as a medical system, and 2 days later it's been withdrawn because that's actually where it's failing. I think we can use data to build up the theories. I think that's and you've seen that, for example, in genetics, where the massive boost of research has been, it's been data mining, the sequencing of genome, but it's really boost the research, high quality research to the extreme, something that you could never do without the data. If you try to come up with a hypothesis for the gene association, that will never ever happen like today. So
okay, thanks.
Interestingly enough, the second keynote that we have is going to help us with just that. I think, if I'm understanding the abstract correctly, the how to plug back into the data and how to interpret what's going on, and kind of looking at the relationship between the data and the model, by Adam Nepstein. Yes, I was wondering if anyone else had any questions. And while I'm wondering that, I'm also wondering whether we should plug in the conversation that's happening in the chat simultaneously, because it's also an interesting one. Kahiwa, I was wondering if you could maybe explain in a few words what the chat was about, concerning rigor and what constitutes good learning.
Sure. Hi, everyone. For me, it was, I think, Vita's question about how we, how are we measuring or understanding what good QE research is and what good learning analytics research is. And that's something that, as an evaluator, we explore through a process of defining those criteria and metrics. And Simon just also had a really good comment about them being quite different conversations. Around what good QE research is. We are talking about the criteria or things that we look at to evaluate a paper. And I think that there certainly is an opportunity and quite an interesting conversation to say, what does good learning analytics look like, or learning analytics research? What does good QE research look like? And in the context of learning analytics, for me, that always comes back to the question of what does good learning looks like, because if our goal is to improve learning through learning analytics, my assumption, my belief is that we have to have an idea about what the end goal is, in order to be able to determine in which direction and how far and how fast we need to travel or support educators or learners to get to that point. So yeah, it was a really interesting thought and a really interesting question. I'd be keen to be a part of that conversation if anyone's willing to move that forward.
I think Simon is.
Hi, thanks Vita, great talk, a good provocation. I'm just thinking within the learning analytics community, we're having this debate at the moment about what do we mean by rigorous LA research, because some of the community is feeding back that, they feel perhaps that their submissions are being rejected by reviewers who don't really understand the paradigm they're working in. And this is a challenge in any interdisciplinary field. So it's a sort of heads up for QE that we need to think about that. Because, if a qualitative person submits to the QE conference, what does it mean to give that person a fair review, but also to bring the great value that the quant perspective is going to bring, etc., and vice versa, absolutely vice versa. We don't want QE to be the place where you can submit kind of ropey qualitative stuff, but because you did some QE, it gets in. And we don't want it to be the place where you did some QE and it was all very good quantitatively, but from a qualitative perspective, it's a mess. So that's the challenge of finding really good reviewers and evolving our own standards. So that's my comment on that one.
David, yes, do you have something to add?
Well, Simon, I'm wondering how much of that comes in part from notions of scarcity, right? I mean, there's two different criteria you could apply, right? One of them is this good enough to be considered part, quality work on the part of the community? And then is this good enough to be presented at the conference? Those diverge as soon as you have fewer slots at the conference than you do, opportunities for, than you do, quality work. I'm asking partly because Morten and I have batted this issue around a bit. And I won't speak for Morten, but I know that he has felt very strongly that putting up fences can be problematic in a community like this. And so I'm trying to triangulate sort of, is this just an evolutionary question? Is this a kind of a question of of scarcity? Is it a fundamental question about what it means for something to be a field? There's sort of a lot of different ways of thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, you could say there's a scarcity issue just in terms of, you know, who gets into the program or whatever. And I think the QE community is extraordinarily good at nurturing and bringing new people in, right? So you certainly don't want to be putting up very high fences when you're trying to build a community, because everybody's learning. Absolutely. And QE has been outstanding in that respect in terms of the ethos and the culture and the way that you guys have shared your tools and your know-how and so forth. So that's absolutely, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's a really interesting question. I mean, one of the things Vita talked about, which I think is one of the most exciting possibilities, but I don't know if we've really seen it happen yet, is the use of machines to come up with potential codes, right, by using topic modeling or something. But we know that machines don't come up with very good codes sometimes compared to what a human's going to come up with. But the sort of the holy grail, you know, at the end of the rainbow is that somehow this huge data set, the machine's going to take a pretty good pass at it and help me bootstrap into a set of codes that I'm happy with as a human analyst. And charting that path and how QE tools support that path, I think is a really exciting idea. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to jump in on anyone other than to say that we actually just got an NSF grant to try and solve exactly that problem. Carl Kai is probably here and he's one of the folks running it. So we're going to dump that on Carl.
I think Andrew and Morton also have their hands up, and I'd just like to sneak in a comment that even though when you're putting up fences, you can still later decide to refine those, take them down, place them elsewhere, so that it's a mobile thing afterwards. Andrew.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in with the sort of counterpoint, right? That if you don't do enough fence building, then your terms start to become meaningless on some level. And this is exactly what happened in digital humanities, right? Where it was sort of a free-for-all for so long that it now is like a meaningless term on some level. And so I think there's this sort of tough negotiation between sort of being open and welcoming and really trying to stretch the boundaries of what you include, but also coming up with standards and coming up with things that really define your community as different from others. And I kind of want to turn that into a question, excuse me, for Vita, which is, I mean, learning analytics as a community that did evolve kind of within a bunch of other similar kinds of approaches, that you mentioned. There are a number of other like conferences and communities that are kind of overlapping or adjacent to, but different from learning analytics. And I'm actually curious, from that perspective, how you've seen the kind of fencing work, right? Like in terms of, balancing being open to a wide range of interdisciplinary work and a wide range of approaches and research paradigms and that sort of thing, but also, not keeping things so broad that you start to lose the middle essentially, and it becomes, this sort of just, something, it becomes like a term of tactical convenience where it's like, okay, if I just use this term or if I kind of do these things, then it kind of gets me through the door and it helps me get funding or it helps me get on the program, or it helps me do this or that, but may or may not have much to do with, what that community is trying to build, and then you kind of lose that on some level. So I'm just curious, from your perspective or anyone else's, how you guys saw that operating in learning analytics or in any other field, and what lessons there might be for balancing sort of fence building with openness.
I love how Vita raised his hand. It was a question for you.
Yeah.
Go ahead and answer.
So basically, I think one interesting part was in learning analytics was really focus on, we want qualitative researchers. We don't want to exclude them. That was something that was really, really emphasized. Another important bit was the way, that's a very unique thing. If you look at any other conference, you have a industry track, which is completely separate from the rest, or practitioner track, and they're basically a room on their own. Nobody talks to them, literally. Like, and learning analytics always focused on bringing those together. So we will always have tracks where the practitioner papers and research papers will be presented together. There is a bit, Andrew, about what you're talking about, seeing as less rigorous than others. And yes, definitely learning analytics with somebody from, say, AID would be seen as less rigorous, because they will see the research that doesn't fit to their paradigm and say, now this is so you're gonna have that. As soon as you try to bridge any kind, it won't look pure to certain people. And that's definitely a possibility. But you know, I think we were keeping that, and that held really well. And there've been tractions as well. And you know, how do you do the, as Simon was saying, the review process and all of that, and that's an issue in itself. But I've seen situations, for example, where the role of senior people was quite important in the field. So, for example, I was a program chair, and certain paper completely got trashed because of it was a qualitative view. And then a senior committee member jumped in and says, you know what, this is the kind we do. And then all of the reviewers changed their attitude. They eventually, it wasn't a need for us to intervene anything. We just said, they agreed. Everybody was happy at the end. But this kind of also teaching the community is also as well. Like this is a valid research, and I will explain you why. So, yeah.
All right, Morton's been waiting for a while.
Yes, actually, I just wanted to point to, Vita, you addressed this fencing problem in a very nice way, I think, in your talk, because instead of like creating distinctions, you were more like I think developing a strong narrative of I mean, talking about closing the interpretive loop, talking about how mixed methods is just, I mean, it's an ambition, but we can even do it better. And also the way you talked about having machines in the loop of the code creation, I mean, helping us steer it. I mean, of course, the machines cannot do it by themselves, but talking about how there's an interplay between the two. So creating a strong and directed narrative is, I think, a nice alternative or a helper instead of thinking about distinctions. So I just wanted to yes, say that. Yeah.
Agree. Nothing else. Yeah, I can fully agree with you. That's
why you said it, right? Yes, but
exceptionally well. Yeah. So it's no, exactly. I mean, if you think about it, all of the theory starts with the data. I mean, you cannot start with the theory, right? You have your data, your intuitions, your experiences. Eventually, I mean, it all starts with the data. Is it just machine derived and crunched the data? I mean, but you always start with the, you know, with experience, right? You always have to, this view of, yeah. So
I think yes, we all start with the data, but there are some fields and some techniques and approaches that don't go back to the data, right? So that maybe that's the distinction that.
Yes, and not sometimes probably that's a technical issue, right? Can you do that? Are you able to go, okay, you can, for example, community of inquiry is a good example. It's a wonderful framework model used in, it's very hard for people to go back to data unless you really have a technical knowledge. It's not easy to do that. It's very expensive to say, okay, can you say, is it working? Can you show the evidence of that? It's very hard to do that. I mean, it's so conceptually high in the description of learning. It's very hard to go to find, this is the data, look, it will be very hard to do that.
Yeah, I think this is definitely one of those tenets of quantitative ethnography that's important to remember, that a lot of approaches don't have that affordance of going back to the coded data or even the raw data. Brendan.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight the work that Kalisa et al. Rogers did with some folks, and also Sylvia's led a group that's kind of done some reflective work on what's been published already to try to get some distillation going of what patterns are seen in QE work, and maybe to help to define it, and also maybe take some steps towards thinking about reporting standards. And I think there's a tension that's, at least in the conversations that I've had with some of the folks doing that research, between not wanting to be overly prescriptive, but also potentially highlighting some trade-offs or things that would, if were shared or reported or foregrounded, that typically maybe aren't, would help us with better meaning making or learn or train others. I mean, I think that's a key piece to kind of to get at as we grow and new things come in, and we really kind of consider, well, what is QE? What puts other methodologies in conversation with ENA, or using ROC, or using encoder, or using row, and how else would we see other approaches, and what would make those QE? And I think part of that is being reflective and descriptive, and kind of weighing some affordances or constraints, especially as things are newer. So one, I want to just kind of highlight some of that work going on, and how that could be useful for us kind of defining maybe the range of things that could be included within this tent that we're trying to build together.
We have a similar thing now happening in learning analytics, of trying to define certain reporting standards, and that's been actually quite an interesting debate, again rubbing the different fields, some in not so nice way. So exactly the issue there. Okay, for example, focus on open access, focus on data availability, and so I think even QE will be even harder, because at least we know, like, wait a second, we all deal with the student data. If you're forcing us to publicly, you're asking a lot. It will slow down the research exceptionally. And we were aware, for example, certain countries will have much harder ways of, if you want to publish the data online, if you're in Australia, good luck. Like, seriously, it will be almost impossible. It's hard everywhere. In QE, it would be probably even harder, because now we're talking about people in different fields. Or somebody from, I don't know, business would say, Leah, we can publish this. Maybe in business it's fine, but if you're doing QE in medical field, again, you're coming it will be more challenging. So these reporting standards really need to be, mindful of the different fields and the regulations surrounding them.
Well, some of those standards will be coming from the processes that you go through in order to produce the results and the conclusions that you have, right? And a lot of that has nothing to do with data. So, making data open. So we don't necessarily have to talk about open data. We can just talk about making that process that we go through from research design to our conclusions more transparent and explicit. But David wants to say something.
Well, I didn't want to pass over this notion of data and going back to the data without at least acknowledging something that, I don't know, maybe I'm just going to steal something that Adam's going to say in 2 days. But I think I see this all the time in working with researchers, especially newer researchers in QE methods, where on some level, we're actually not interested in the data, right? What we're actually interested in is the data as a window into the life world of the people who generated the data. And that closing the interpretive loop actually means going back to that. And I do think that those are different things, right? Validating that the model is treating the data correctly isn't the same thing as trying to validate that the model is fairly representing the life world of the people, about who it's making claims. And I think that's a really important distinction, and an important thing to keep in mind in QE, because one of the things that I see over and over again is when you actually push yourself that last mile, or at least try and push yourself as close to that last mile as you can get, since of course you can never actually walk in somebody's shoes. It's amazing how quickly things that seem simple in the modeling side suddenly start to get much more complicated. If you just go back to the data, it fits the data, but it doesn't necessarily actually fit the experiences that the data are that generated the data and that the data represent. So I just want to make sure that that distinction is out there in the discussion. Yeah, I see participatory QE, and I definitely think that that's a great move, and there's going to be a great session on that coming up at some point. I don't know exactly when it is, but I'm not even necessarily talking about whether it's generated in a participatory way. It's a question of what is it that you're trying to be fair to, right? You do need to be fair to the data, and you do need to be fair to theory, and you do need to be fair to the statistics and the science and the modeling and the machinery. But you also need to be fair to the people about whom you're making claims, and those are all different things, but they're all important, but they're all different.
And also how to report on that.
Well, sure, yeah, sure.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions for Vita? I think that I want to thank Vita for that amazing keynote and this wonderful inspired presentation today. Thank you so much for those who came and just listened, and also those who had questions and comments. Very, very inspirational. I wanted to remind everyone that we will have another keynote coming up on November 10th. It'll be at 1:30 CST. It'll be given by Adam Lefstein, and we will get to know more about meaning making in ethnography. We also have a closing session after that at 3:30 CST, and we hope to see you there. Otherwise, happy to run into everyone in the virtual conference space, and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Vita.